What is normal? Well, the things we're going to show you today definitely are not. In view of what our ancestors did, we can only shake our heads today. Especially towards the sixth point, which leaves us completely dumbfounded. You want to know what unimaginable practices were not uncommon some time ago? Then stay tuned and make sure to watch this video to the end. Before we get started, be sure to hit the like button and ring the notification bell for more great videos. Also, stick around until the end to hear about one of the strangest traditions from many years ago that's truly bizarre. Painted stockings. Many women who wanted to buy stockings during the Second World War were forced to give up when the shelves were empty. After all, most of the nylon was needed for the army, for example as parachute fabric, but also for ropes, hoses, and cleaning bristles. Where supply was scarce, other ways had to be found to give women's legs the desired pantyhose look. For this reason, products such as liquid stockings and leg makeup came onto the market in the 1940s. As you can already imagine, these were creams and pastes that were supposed to be visually reminiscent of the coveted but unavailable items of clothing. When money ran out for decent leg cosmetics, some women even dyed their legs with tea. Others drew a long line to mimic at least a seam. To the chagrin of the wearers, however, they had to take cover as quickly as possible at the first sign of rain. After all, the painted stockings would have been washed off immediately. In post-war Germany, real stockings were so hard to come by that they became a separate form of payment on the black market. It's forbidden to be ugly. What initially sounds like a bad joke was part of everyday life in the USA more than 100 years ago. It was officially forbidden to be ugly. Let's take a look at the decree that came into force in Chicago in 1881. In order to not cause discomfort for the rest of the citizens, anyone who was, quote, maimed, sick, or deformed in any other way should be banned from the streets. Anyone who ventured out in public despite their undesirable appearance could be fined up to $50, which was a small fortune at the time. After World War I, more and more soldiers returned to the United States suffering horrific injuries. Although popular attitudes changed, the Chicago ugliness law would be enforced well into the 1950s, only to be abolished in 1974. James BEAUGE. James BEAUGE holds a curious record. In 1913, he became the first child in history to be mailed. Previously, his parents had given their 8-month-old son 15-cent stamps and insured him for $50. And sure enough, the boy was then delivered in a package to his grandmother in Ohio. The parcel service of the U.S. Postal Service had only started operating a few weeks earlier, and it was not yet precisely regulated what things could be sent by post and which not. Since stamps were significantly cheaper than train tickets, some parents soon resorted to the children's mail as well. This also affected 4-year-old Charlotte May Pierstoff, who traveled almost 121 kilometers in a mail bag. However, this bizarre hustle and bustle in which nobody cared about the well-being of the children soon came to an end. After the sending of people was officially banned, there were only isolated deliveries of children. The last known case was in 1915. Smoking against asthma. Every year, millions of people around the world die as a direct or indirect result of cigarettes. Tobacco consumption kills more than 7.6 million people worldwide every year. Today, the health dangers of reaching for cigarettes are well known, but that wasn't always the case. Around 100 years ago, people believed that smoking was even healthy. In fact, this attitude was shared by some doctors who appeared in tobacco ads, celebrating the acrid smoke as a cure for asthma. In detail, this was an equally cynical and effective marketing ploy by the tobacco companies. In fact, many people already knew at the beginning of the 20th century that cigarettes are by no means harmless. It would be many decades before the general public learned the truth about how the habit could send you to your grave. Mentally ill. Insane asylum, madhouse, loony bin. The derogatory names that were used for psychiatric clinics in the past leave no doubt as to how society viewed such clinical pictures at the time. The matter becomes even more fatal when we look at how the mentally ill were treated before such institutions opened. In the 17th and 18th centuries, citizens strove for the so-called exclusion of unreasonableness. This meant that all those who were different in any way were locked in a common space. In addition to the so-called mentally ill, this also included the unemployed, prostitutes, and beggars. Frequently, the allegedly insane were held in chains and subjected to brutal torture to bring them back to sanity. Indeed, at that time, it was believed that the mentally ill were resistant to heat, cold, pain, and hunger, so no clothing or sufficient food was provided for them. Particularly perfidious. In some cases, the inmates, there can be no talk of patience in this context, could be gawked at for a small sum of money. Human zoos. While we're on the subject of inhumane practices, let's take a look at the often forgotten history of human zoos. While we may lock lions, elephants, or bears into zoos today, many years ago, foreigners from across the world would be locked in cages and placed on display. In fact, the foreigners on display had a permanent place in all fairs, folk festivals, circuses, and zoos. The pathetic attractions were always presented in a detailed setting. In 1896, this also included 230 people from Sudan who had to live in mud houses at the exhibition in Geneva despite the bitter cold. Of course, the prisoners did not choose their fate voluntarily. They were simply kidnapped from their homes and locked in cages. Such ethnographic shows were very popular in North America and Europe, with millions of people flocking to the events to catch a glimpse of the exotic and foreign. Not infrequently, special human enclosures were installed in ordinary zoos. The last of these despicable human shows then took place in 1958 at the World Exhibition in Brussels. At that time, a Congolese village and its inhabitants were on display. Coca-Cola and cocaine. You knew we'd end up here, didn't you? This is one of the most well-known facts in the modern world. Coca-Cola used to contain real cocaine. How else do you think it would give you that massive burst of energy? Coca-Cola is just as popular today as it was over 100 years ago. Drinks like this are known for being one of the leading causes of diabetes and obesity. Yet, we still drink these sugary beverages as much as we drink water. It's been said that when Coca-Cola originally hit store shelves, it contained as much as 250 milligrams of cocaine as well as tons of caffeine. By the 1940s, cocaine was banned. There were reports of people falling ill from drinking the beverage, and at least 13 people lost their lives from an overdose. These days, the recipe has seen a major change, and the drink is far different than it once was. There's no longer cocaine in Coca-Cola, though there is a ton of caffeine. So the next time you're thinking about drinking coffee as an afternoon pick-me-up, maybe reach for the sweet, refreshing taste of Coca-Cola. Bayer heroin. You may not want to believe this, but Bayer, the #1 seller of aspirin and over-the-counter medications, once sold heroin. Back in those days, heroin was touted as being the remedy for virtually any bodily inconvenience you could imagine. It could treat a headache, muscle pain, bronchitis, and so much more. But most of all, it could help you sleep. This drug was everywhere, and many parents would put their children to bed with cough syrup that had been mixed with heroin. Problems began to arise when we found out that the medication was highly addictive. It didn't take long for it to be banned in the United States and other countries, and these days, you cannot even manufacture the drug without being sent to federal prison. This may seem baffling to us these days, but heroin was once one of the most popular over-the-counter medications on the market. Forget Tylenol or Advil. Pop a pill of heroin and you'll be as good as new. We're obviously being sarcastic here. This drug led to serious issues for many people, and we don't know for sure, but it's expected that hundreds of thousands of people likely passed away due to overdosing on the drug unintentionally. Tattoo head collection. Many of us like to collect things, whether it be stamps, cars, toys, or something else entirely. But what if I told you that some people used to collect preserved human heads? The Mokomokai are heads of the New Zealand Maori people that have been preserved and covered with multiple tattoos. Various tribes and groups of people preserved their dead. That's not the strange part. Things get weird when you realize that these heads were bought and sold by thousands of people as valuable commodities. The trend only began to fade away sometime in the 19th century when people began to get their heads on straight and realized that collecting human heads was weird. Very weird. Back during this time period, men were known for having many tattoos that would cover their faces. Women would usually only have tattoos on their chin or lips. Each tattoo was unique and would tell a story about that person's life. During times of war, it's known that people would trade these heads in exchange for weapons or ammunition. That just shows how valuable these heads truly were. Today, we couldn't even imagine preserving someone's head and selling it. But back then it was very trendy and helped preserve the stories and lives of individuals who have since passed on. When you think of it that way, it may sound more enticing. But these days, we'll just archive the person's Facebook page so friends and family can scroll through their page and relive old memories. I think that's much more normal and acceptable, don't you? Experiment kits. A teddy bear, a doll, and a laboratory kit with real plutonium and uranium. It really doesn't take much to make the little ones happy. What is, of course, an absolute no-go today was not viewed quite so closely in the 1950s. Dozens of test centers that test children's toys for their dangers. Ridiculous. Even if the quantities of radioactive substances were rather small, it seems inconceivable today that the set was actually commercially available at the time. The advertising slogan of bright-eyed children has never been more appropriate. Baby cages. Children need some fresh air. It's just unfortunate when the mother doesn't have time to go outside with her baby because of all the housework. At least this was the thought process many years ago. Fortunately, this problem used to be easy to fix. To do this, the child was put in a barred box that was fastened to the outside of the window. If the little one was well ventilated, he could then be brought back into the apartment. What today is more reminiscent of prison cages was actually well-intentioned back then. Accordingly, American doctor Luther Emmett Holt stated that fresh air is essential to clean the blood, promote growth, and stabilize health. Decorative hermits. Decorative hermits, or in other words, human garden gnomes. If a hermit wanted to earn some extra money in the 18th and 19th centuries, he had the opportunity to stay in English country parks. It was contractually stipulated at what times of day the garden dweller had to appear in order to entertain the owners and their guests with his appearance. The advertisement published by the nobleman Charles Hamilton in the 18th century shows the duties of the ornamental hermit. As a result, he must wear a woolen coat, and under no circumstances should he cut his hair, beard, or nails. In addition, it was strictly forbidden to roam around Mr. Hamilton's estate or to speak to the servants. A so-called hermitage was to serve as a dwelling, where human adornment would find various objects such as a mat, a straw mattress, and an hourglass. Dead. During the Victorian era, many citizens engaged in a morbid practice. They took photographs of their deceased loved ones. For this purpose, the dead were draped as lifelike as possible and often found themselves next to their family members who were still alive. As a result, it wasn't always easy to tell which person in the picture was already dead and which wasn't. Since the infant mortality rate was very high at the time, young deceased people were often captured in pictures. Often, these were the only photos taken of the person. While today any of us can take a picture in no time at all, things were very different 150 years ago. Although photography was relatively quite common back then, it was anything but commonplace. Alright folks, now it's your turn. What thing from back then surprised you the most? Do you know other things that used to be perfectly normal but would be unimaginable today? Let us know in the comments below. Please give our video a thumbs up if you're glad these disturbing practices are a thing of the past. Also, while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe to get regular updates of the most incredible stories. And with that, thanks for watching, take care, and see you next time.